Christian Pulisic, Tyler Adams, Weston McKennie, and John Brooks. There was a time, if you would have asked me, surefire starters for the 2022 World Cup, those four would have been the only players I would have named. Now, it looks like John Brooks has a chance of missing the tournament altogether. I'm Marco Sagesacker, and today I'm going to be talking about how this happened to John Brooks. Well, since the national team returned last year, he was the starter for them, and things were going pretty well. He looked good in friendlies leading up to the Nations League, and then the Nations League itself, he excelled. He might have been our best player against Honduras and was very solid against Mexico. But then World Cup qualifiers happened. After a mixed game against Canada, he had a very poor performance against Honduras, and things started to spiral for him after that. He missed the next window due to injury, and then he was left off the squad altogether. And now he's been dropped at Wolfsburg by their new manager, and it looks like he won't be offered a contract this summer. So why has this happened to John Brooks? Well, when you look at him, there are a couple reasons, and I'm just going to boil it down to him on the field and him off the field. And there's some pretty easy explanations for on the field. On the field, he's a very slow player, and that can harm him a lot when he's not paired with athletic teammates. He's able to get taken advantage of in behind by defenses, and him not being fast can be a real detriment. Another thing is his passing. While on the ball, he's a great player on his day. He's been the catalyst of our attacks sometimes, being the main driving force when we start Acosta and Lletget in the midfield. But there are also games where he's not good, to the point where it's a liability with his passing. And that's a real problem with John Brooks, his inconsistency. Because on his day, he's a top Bundesliga center back. But there are other times where he just doesn't look good. And from watching him, and this is my own opinion, I believe it may be down to his ego. And what I mean by that is, I think that he knows how good he is. So when he's up against opposition that isn't the greatest, he can coast by, assuming that he doesn't have to give 100%. Now you can see this in a couple of his performances this year with the national team. There was a friendly against Switzerland, a friendly where no stakes to the game. He was very poor that game. Game against Honduras, it was Honduras. He just dominated against them in the summer. He could coast by. And Canada wasn't good until a couple of years ago. I think he just assumed that he could coast by in those games, and it cost him his spot. Now, it should be said the United States hasn't been lighting the world on fire without him, and Wolfsburg have looked even worse, but there are reasons why he got dropped. And there's also the off-the-field thing. I mentioned his ego, and I believe that led to some clashes with people. There was a report by Bild that called John Brooks a problem child and said that he had attitude issues. The only thing I can think of that I've seen is him confronting Berhalter during the game against Canada, though this was one of those games where he started Acosta and Lletget in the midfield, and Brooks was the only guy who could get anything going forward because Adams was marked out of the game, so I think it was justified, but that's the only thing I can recall, and Berhalter hasn't had an issue with Pulisic calling him out publicly or Sebastian Lletget not celebrating after a win, so I don't know if this is an issue, or if Bill were just making something up, or there's a hit piece, I don't know, as Hercules Gomez called it. But let's entertain the idea that there is a rift between Berhalter and Brooks. So, and even with his new boss at Wolfsburg, why would that be? Well, when you look at John Brooks, he seems to be professional during almost everything he does. He looks cool showing up to games, and when something bad happens to him, he's handled it very well. When he was, in my opinion, when he was objectively wrongfully dropped from the USA national team, he was very professional about it. He said that he'd do better, and he understood the decision. And now when he's dropped by Wolfsburg, he's keeping his head down and training hard. So I don't think there's anything like a rift with players or him dragging down the locker room like can happen to some players. I don't feel like Brooks is that guy. If anything, on the field, he's been nothing but a leader from what I've seen. Now, obviously, I don't know everything, but I don't see that with Brooks. The only thing I can think of is going back to his ego. He may have had some clashes with Berhalter or his new manager, and I could definitely see that happening. Now, is that too much of an issue, though? I mean, challenging managers isn't exactly anything new for athletes in sports, let alone soccer, let alone the American team where Christian Pulisic just did it. So I have to look at the current managers of Berhalter and Florian Kovac, And Berhalter seems to pick rosters based on players he likes, not exactly talent. Now, this is, I don't know. This is my opinion, but I don't see how I can really think that Christian Roldan, Sebastian Lletget, Yazi Zardes, and Paul Arriola earned their spots on the national team. And with Kovac, he just got Werder Bremen relegated. Maybe the problem is with the managers rather than Brooks. I mean, Wolfsburg hasn't turned things around. The USA, I don't feel like they've been great without John Brooks, and I feel like they've been worse without him. Now, this doesn't take away from his criticism. He is still inconsistent, and his speed is still a very big issue. But when you look at it from a national team perspective, if he's going to be playing for the national team, he's going to be flanked by Anthony Robinson on the left, a great athlete, and either Miles Robinson or Chris Richards on the other side. Both of them very good athletes. Speed isn't that big of an issue. If he was a right-footed center back and was having to cover for Serginho Dest, maybe we could entertain that idea. But as that left-footed center back, I don't feel like it's that big of a problem. And then with his inconsistency, as I mentioned before, his inconsistency is more down to lowering his level of play when facing poor opposition. This is rather than someone like Mark McKenzie, who seems to not be able to do well in big games like the Nations League while he was performing very well in friendlies. And when your problem is lowering your level of competition, come a World Cup, that's not exactly a bad thing. In Portugal, that was their problem, and they won a Euro and a Nations League based off raising their level of competition to their opponents. Now, it's definitely not a good thing, and I could definitely see you saying, due to his athleticism, I'd rather have Miles Robinson in the squad, but at the same time, his ability on the ball is something that Miles Robinson doesn't have in his locker. He might be able to develop it if he moves abroad. We've seen players take steps forward, but at the moment, Brooks is our better center back on the ball, and I'd like to see a pairing of him and Richards. That hasn't happened yet. And just, even if you disagree with that, he needs to be in the squad. I mean, I mentioned Mark McKenzie's inconsistency issues, and Walker Zimmerman has the same athletic concerns without the ability on the ball that John Brooks has. Plus, I'm a bit concerned about Walker Zimmerman on set pieces due to his couple of things that happened to the national team in Nashville's record. But just overall, I don't see how he can continue to drop John Brooks. Even in Wolfsburg, with how they've been performing, you'd think you'd give him another chance, especially given how well they started the season. But yeah, that's my thoughts. John Brooks has some clear flaws in his play, but that's been multiplied due to his personality, and I feel like he's being treated unfairly. He's still an extremely talented player that needs to be in the national team. So all I've talked about with this. See you.